Hey friends, it's RSKT, and welcome back to another episode of the AE Modular Video Library, the series that takes a look at the wide range of modules available for the AE Modular system. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the MIDI clock divider module, giving a general overview before diving into some demo patches. Before we begin, AE Modular is a small but ever-growing system, so if you find this video useful, be sure to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already, or consider supporting me on Patreon. The videos for this series can be found in a playlist on my channel and can be viewed in any order. Green thumbnails used for the official Tangible Waves modules, and pink thumbnails are used to cover third-party modules. With all of that said, let's now have a look at the MIDI clock divider. So, just like it says on the tin, the MIDI clock divider divides the MIDI clock that we can put into our AE modular system. But not only that, we can also divide other clock sources like LFOs and whatnot. So there's going to be a couple of different ways that I can go about demoing this today. I'm probably going to start with something simple like the LFOs, and then we'll dive into external gear like the deluge over here. Now, just to go over a couple of the inputs, outputs, and controls. Up the top here, we have a clock input. That's where we plug in our clock source. We also have a reset input, which we'll get into a little bit more later on. We also have bus clock and bus start, which isn't usually on many of the other modules. In terms of outputs, we've got two outputs for output A, two outputs for output B, and then a mult underneath it. Down here, you can see that we have dotted or triplet as a switch that we can toggle on and off, but keep in mind that this only affects output B, and we can see a little arrow showing that output B has got a separate LED from output A. And then below that, we have this clock divider, which is pretty much the star of the show. We can go like 32nd notes, 16th notes, 8 notes, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to kick things off rather simply, and let's just focus on using this with an LFO to get going. So I've got a square wave LFO going up here, and that's represented by this blinking light. It's going rather fast. Let's plug it into the clock input. Great. So even though this LFO is moving quite fast, and we can see that here, we can see that it's being divided into pretty much a slower rhythm. So at the moment, it's on 16th notes. If I go to 32nd notes, there we go. You'll also notice that output B is sort of happening on an offbeat, and that's the dotted or triplet. So at the moment it's on dotted. We can move it to triplet. I'm getting that 1, 2, 3. And let's slow it down a bit. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So yeah, pretty cool. Now, the beauty of something like this is if I were to take output A, for example, and I'll plug it into the trigger for my bass drum. And then let's take the output of that and we'll plug it into our mixer. And of course, I haven't got my mixer hooked up to my audio out, so I'll just take care of that real quick. Great, so we've got a bass drum going. Awesome. And then we could take something like output B, and we could go a rim shot or a snare. Let's just go the, a hi-hat. And we'll plug that into the second channel. Pretty cool. And if we switch this maybe a bit higher, we could switch this to triplet. Pretty neat stuff. We've already got a little bit of a rhythm going with these two different divisions happening. Keep in mind that we can still control like the speed of things with this LFO. We can push this up pretty high. So yeah, great little performance tool for when you're on the go and you want to sort of move up into faster techno ranges for a bit. So now let's go over the main use case that I'm predominantly using this thing for. And that is syncing it up with external things like my deluge over here. So hopefully on the camera, you can see that I have a MIDI out cable running out of my deluge. That's then going off screen and is coming in through this cable here to the MIDI in on the master module. Once I have MIDI coming into the master module, that gets put around the bus clock. So you notice bus clock is actually put on a few other modules around here. I'm going to quickly turn off the clock on my Euclid grid because it has its own internal clock. And let's just have a look at what happens if I plug the bus clock directly into the clock source of the Euclid grid. Now at the moment, my deluge is set to 120 beats per minute. So if I press play, you notice this is going ridiculously fast. And that is definitely not 120 beats per minute. I know that for a fact because this clock is set to 120 beats per minute. So if I press play, that's the speed that it should be going at. This is because we need to use something like a MIDI clock divider to divide the 24 pulses per quarter note from the deluge and then evenly spread it throughout the system. So yeah, this is running straight into the bus. That means that I can just take a bus clock from here and plug it into the clock source of the MIDI clock divider, press play, and now I can divide that signal into what I need it to be. Now I'm just going to quickly set up a very rough patch just so that we've got something to listen to while we're demoing the rest of the following. I'll just take the module, plug it into a VCA. We'll trigger that VCA with an envelope. Let's trigger the envelope with Euclid grid down here. And we'll just introduce a few more steps. We'll take the output of our VCA and plug it into a wasp filter. And then we'll go from wasp filter into our mixer. And of course, I unplugged my mixer cable for the audio out before. Fix that. Let's tighten up this envelope a little bit. Great. So at the moment, we're not using the MIDI clock divider for anything. What I want to do is I want to take a cable and I want to take the divided clock from the MIDI clock divider and we'll hook it up to the clock input of the Euclid grid. So now when I press play on my deluge, and I might just turn on the metronome so that we can hear the tempo of our deluge going. We can hear that sounds a little bit weird. So do you hear that first note doesn't quite reset every single time? So there's a couple of other things that we need to keep in mind when using something like this. For example, we have bus start and reset. So basically we need to tell the MIDI clock divider that every time I press play on my deluge, I want it to reset the clock divider right back to square one and then start the clock sequence. And then I also want to tell my Euclid grid, I mean, this is a little off topic, but I want to tell it that every time it stops, I want it to reset straight away back to the start of the pattern. Now, if I press play, all synced up very nicely. Just so that we don't have to listen to the metronome all the time, I might just quickly program in a very simple drum beat on my deluge. Great, so I've got a nice beat lined up on my deluge now. If we listen to this. Cool, and now we can go ahead and try different divisions using the MIDI clock divider. We can play around with our envelope. And instead of going straight from a wasp filter, let's plug it into a delay, just for a little bit more of a nicer sound. We could maybe open and close the filter slightly, just with a simple triangle wave. And then we could speed things back up again. Let's add on a little bit of sidechain to this audio track that the AE modular is coming through. Maybe a little bit of reverb. So I really think that this showcases the greatest part about the MIDI clock divider, and that is using it with external gear, making everything sync up and sing nicely together. Now, one thing that I often find myself doing when using this is making a duplicate using the second output of A and plugging it into the mult underneath. And that just gives me like, you know, a bunch of other clock sources that I can just clock things with in my system. So if I were to take one of these and let's plug it into the clock in on the RBSS over here. From there, I could take the CV out and I'll whack that into an attenuator. From that attenuator, just to tighten the range of notes a bit, you guessed it, I'm going to plug it into the analog input on my EuroPi, and I'll switch this to a quantizer. I want to make sure my EuroPi is being triggered, and I'll just trigger that with the exact same sequence that we're using for the envelope. And now we can take that quantized output and plug it into the frequency input of the module. And this way we can get a little bit of pitch change. Introduce a little bit of attack just because the version of the module I have has a little bit of trouble changing frequency straight away. And just remember, we can speed this up at any time. Or slow it down. Which completely changes the tone of the track that we're making so far. But it can be a really useful performance thing as well. So other than that, I don't really think that there is much else for me to say about the MIDI clock divider module. Other than that, it's extremely useful. I use it all the time, just making it talk to my other pieces of gear, and I absolutely love it. I hope that you enjoyed the demo patches that are about to play where I'm using this module. Hit the like if you like, and if you don't, tell me why. Please subscribe, check me out on Patreon, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.